Good evening and thank you for attending. My name is Natalie Sayre and I'll be the moderator for this evening's debate. Before we begin, please silence all phones and electronic devices. Additionally, please refrain from any interruptions to the debate as it is being recorded for on-demand viewing and post-captioning services. The Citizens Clean Election Commission is the sponsor for this evening's debate. The Clean Elections Act is a campaign finance reform and public education measure initiated by Arizona citizens and passed by voters in 1998. The system provides clean funding for qualified participating candidates who agree to abide by the Clean Elections Act and rules. These include contribution and spending limits, foregoing special interest money, and participating in commission debates. We encourage audience questions, so please utilize the note card given to you when you entered the room and hold it up. Our volunteers will pick up the cards and deliver them to me. If you need additional cards, just raise your hand. If you have questions for a specific candidate, please include the candidate's name on the note card. They will be considered during the second half of the debate. We screen questions for clarity to eliminate duplications, speeches, or personal attacks on candidates. The debate is scheduled for 1 hour, so we may not get to all audience questions, but we will do our best. Tonight's debate includes 1-minute opening statements. The first half of the debate begins with 2 minutes to each candidate to answer the same question. After all candidates have responded to the question, the first responding candidate will be given an additional 30 seconds. We will rotate which candidate responds first. The second half will allow for a different question per candidate with 1 minute to answer and optional 30-second comment periods. And finally, 1-minute closing statements. We ask that you remain polite to all of the candidates and give them a fair and uninterrupted hearing, no matter how strongly you may agree or disagree with anything being said. Tonight's participants are Ms. Kristen Dybvig-Pawelko, a Democratic candidate, Clean Elections participant, running for state senator in District 15. Ms. Julie Gunnigal, Democratic candidate, also a Clean Elections participant, state representative, District 15, and finally Ms. Jennifer Samuels, a Democratic candidate, Clean Elections participant, running for state representative in District 15. The order in which the candidates will speak has been determined by alphabetical order by last name, starting with the Senate for opening comments, and will progress from that starting point. The order for the second half will be determined by reverse alphabetical order by last name, starting with the House. Kristen, will you start your opening remarks, please?
Yes. First of all, thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate having you here. And thank you to the Clean Elections Commission for sponsoring this debate. My name is Kristen Dybvig-Pawelko, and I'm running for State Senate in LD 15. And I'm running because I watched as 75,000 students, teachers, and parents descended on the Capitol in April, and by May, nothing had been done. We had passed a budget with what I would call a retroactive cost of living increase for teachers, and nothing done to reduce our class sizes or rebuild our infrastructure for our students. I'm running because I have 3 children myself, 13, 11, and 8. And at some point before they graduate from high school, I would like to see education funding restored to Arizona. I'm running because I have taught at ASU for almost 20 years, and I've seen the impact that these classroom cuts have had on my students. And it's not fair for future generations to live with our mistakes. So I'm running to fully fund our education to get back to where we once were.
Thank you. Julie.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. Legislative District 15, I want to represent you in the House of Representatives. My name is Julie Gunnigal. I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I'm a former prosecutor of politicians. I spent part of my legal career putting politicians in jail when they stole public funds in one of the most corrupt cities in the world, Chicago. And when I moved back to Arizona and saw the same conflicts of interest, the same corruption, the same dirty money flowing into our government here at home, I decided to run. I'm running because I know that we will never have the kind of healthcare, the kind of education, the kind of school safety that our citizens deserve until we address these conflicts of interest in government. You can find more information about me, Julie Gunnigle, at my website, Gunnigle for House, Gunnigle, forhouse.com. And I hope by the end of this debate to earn your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jennifer.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you to the Clean Elections Commission for hosting this debate. Thank you to the audience members who are here tonight and to those who are watching at home. My name is Jennifer Samuels, and I'm running for the State House in LD 15. I'm a teacher, an Arizona native, and a mom. I have a diverse background, including an MBA and 10 years in the business world, in branch operations and in marketing. I also have a master's in special education and have worked in a variety of grades, from kindergarten all the way till 8th grade. I've worked in special education and general education classrooms. I've been a parent volunteer, and I've served on the PTA board of directors. I'm running because education is the foundation of our democracy, and our state's elected leaders have failed to pass a budget that can fully fund our schools. I'm grateful to be here tonight, and I hope to earn your vote.
Thank you. So our first question, we will start with Julie. If elected, what would be your top priorities beyond education and such, because I think you've all aligned on education? What would be your top priorities, and what would be the first piece of legislation you would want to submit?
Yes, thank you. The very first piece of legislation I would submit would be comprehensive ethics reform for our state government. Arizona, we have a problem. We have a problem in that our government is not being held accountable with the way they spend our tax dollars, and it is costing everyone from our seniors to our kindergarten students in school right now. Here's how we can fix it. So first, as a former public corruption prosecutor, one of the things that I hold really dear is this clean elections process. We need to clean up our elections, and we need to do it through state action. We had an opportunity with the Outlaw Dirty Money bill that was subsequently removed by the Supreme Court from our ballots. And we need to be able to reform how it is that money flows into our elections. Secondly, we need comprehensive ethics reform for our legislators at the Capitol such that no one can get rich off public service. Right now, we have charter school millionaires serving their constituents, and serving really ought to be in quotations because it's questionable whether they're serving their own interests or the interests of the public. Last, we need to stop the revolving door that happens between government and lobbying work. Right now, there are few, if any, controls as to what our legislators can do when they leave office, meaning that they can take their Rolodexes with them and parlay what should be public service work in the public good over to private service, lucrative private service in the lobbying sector. It's unethical, it destroys our faith in democracy, and it needs to stop. That would be the first bill that I would introduce if elected.
Thank you. Jennifer, your first bill and your priorities.
Thank you. As a teacher and a mom, my whole world is education. It, of course, is my top priority. And if I was to be elected, the first piece of legislation I would enact is to fully fund our schools. We know in the course of the last 10 years, we're missing $1 billion in funding. Yes, that's a billion with a B. We're grateful for the work that Red for Ed movement brought in restoring about $300 million more to our schools. But we still have a long way to go. We're missing about $700 million in funding. What that means as a teacher is overcrowded classrooms. What that means as a student is slipping through the cracks because our teachers, no matter how dedicated or how highly qualified they are never going to reach their students in class sizes that large. One of the first pieces of legislation I would like to sponsor is capping class sizes. In grades kindergarten through 3rd grade, we should cap at 20 students for every teacher. We know in those early primary grades that our students are learning to read, and then later they read to learn. If we can fully fund our schools, restore that $700 million that our schools are still missing, and if we can cap our class sizes, we can finally reach our students.
Okay, thank you. And Kristen.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. So I think that if I had participated in the primary debate, my answer would have been different. But because we are Here right now, after Outlaw Dirty Money was removed from the ballot, my answer now is I think we should legislate the Outlaw Dirty Money initiative. I feel like we are living in the Wizard of Oz. So most of us are familiar with that movie. The wizard is behind the curtain, and it's time to pull back the curtain and figure out who is funding our elections. Is it APS? Is it Cox Communications? We need more transparency in our government. So the Outlaw Dirty Money initiative was signed by over 280,000 Arizona citizens. And the fact that it was signed by so many Arizonans means that it's something that we really do desire. I know that the three of us collected signatures in the heat of the summer in order to try and get it on the ballot. And I sat and looked at those signatures as they were being verified to see why they wouldn't be accepted by the court. So that would be the first piece of legislation. It is something that a similar bill was on the Tempe ballot, and the citizens of Tempe voted for it with a 91% rate, which means that it's a bipartisan piece of legislation. Everybody supports knowing where money is coming to fund campaigns, except incumbents and the people who are currently legislating. So it is important for us to know where that money is coming from. It is important for candidates to know, and it is important for voters to know. So the first piece of legislation that I would propose would be to legislate the Outlaw Dirty Money initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. And Julie, your 30 seconds.
No, that's exactly right. We also need to look at why Outlaw Dirty Money and Invest in Education were taken off the ballot. And in this case, it was taken off because our legislature last session left a little parting gift, which was this idea of strict compliance. This idea that if you were a citizen and you somehow went outside the lines, or if you wrote PHX instead of Phoenix, or if you signed a petition and you were on the county line, they weren't going to count that you wanted to have that on your ballot. And I think that is absolutely unconscionable. It's unconscionable.
We will let you finish your word. All right, so let's talk about school funding. Jennifer, we're going to start with you. What would you propose to do to deal with the other areas of the budget that would need to be cut in order to transfer those issues over to the school funding?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, I wouldn't cut the budget. Education is already getting 50% of the budget. It should be enough. Our problem is a revenue problem. We don't have enough revenue coming into our state to fully fund our schools. On top of that, we are giving corporate tax cuts to large corporations that don't need extra money. Our students need new textbooks, and they need air conditioning in their buses like in Mesa. I lost my train of thought. That's right.
Well, would you like to continue? I mean, you have time.
Can you repeat the question?
Certainly. So what would you propose to do with the budget and the other areas that would have to be cut in order to reallocate the funds to school funding?
Yes, absolutely. As a teacher, I work with different personalities all day long, and I find ways to mediate and collaborate and get things done. So if elected, I propose to work in a bipartisan way across the aisle to find ways to find sustainable funding for our schools. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Kristen, same question.
Okay, thank you. I also think that this is a false choice. We really do need to increase our revenue in order to increase our funding to our public schools. So I agree with what Jennifer has said. We need to try and figure out a way to lessen the burden on our taxpayers and have our corporations pay their fair share. Currently, 75% of corporations are not paying anything except for the $50 minimum tax every year, which means that they're not footing the bill for educating the people that they're going to hire. They should be responsible for some of that funding because they ultimately are benefiting from our education system. So I think that we really need to think about other sources of revenue. And the problem is if we keep the current legislature in place, that's not going to happen. So we need to move beyond what we've had right now. We need to elect new people who are interested in doing some things to increase our revenue. If I were to think of one area of the budget that we can reallocate resources from, I would say I think we should start looking at our prison system. Right now, our private prisons cost about $1,600 more per year than our public prisons to house an inmate. And our private prisons turn away the sickest and most costly inmates. So the fact that we are incarcerating way too many people, because we're the 5th largest state for incarceration of our population, but also that we are spending so much money on private prisons and that we have a profit motive in incarceration is unconscionable. So I would suggest to reallocate some of our funding from private prisons, move to a public prison system that focuses on rehabilitation in order to reduce recidivism, actually treats people for drug dependency, which is the reason that most people are in prison, and we can fully fund our education with some of those profits. But we do need to increase our revenue. There isn't one area of the budget that we can cut because we are so far behind in what we need for education. Thank you.
Thank you. And Julie?
Yes, thank you. I too agree that this is a false dichotomy. Sure, we have waste, fraud, and abuse in our system. We do, and we know it, and we can clean that up. But let's not assume that there is $700 million there, which is what we need to fill the crater that is in our education system right now. What we need to do instead is start looking at revenue, and what the system that we have in place just isn't working. Let's take a deep breath for a second and think about what it means that 3 out of 4 corporations pay the $50 minimum tax. We have one of the largest corporate welfare systems in the United States. We have been issuing tax credits since 1980, and we issue about $13 billion in tax credits. That's billion with a B. To put that into perspective, the money flowing into our general fund every year, it's about $9 to $10 billion. So we are actually giving away more in corporate tax credits than we are taking in each and every year. And they are as diverse as the lobbyists who lobby for them. We give away corporate tax credits for everything from horse vitamins to crop dusters to private jets. In the state of Arizona, if you buy 3-inch pipe, you're paying sales tax on it. Incidentally, you're paying the 11th highest sales tax in the United States. But if you buy 4-inch pipe, you pay no sales tax. And a sales tax that depends on the size of pipe only makes sense if you're a company that buys an awful lot of 4-inch pipe. Southwest Gas. We need to end this system where the only people who pay sales tax are the suckers like us who can't afford lobbyists down at the Capitol. And we need to make sure that our corporations are paying their fair share. And sales tax credit reform is absolutely the way to do that, to increase revenue in a way that's fair to all of us. And if we were to do that, not only could we fully fund education, we could bring our sales tax for everyone down a full 1%.
Thank you. And Jennifer, an additional 30 seconds.
Thank you. And another thing we could do is to analyze the budget line by line and remove unnecessary expenditures for specialty programs that benefit a small group of individuals, such as the Freedom Schools. And let us not forget Article 11, Section 10 of our state's Constitution that mandates us to fund our schools in an appropriate manner. Not only is there $700 million missing in our budget to fund our schools, but we are constitutionally obligated to provide funding for those schools.
Thank you. Kristen, we're going to start with you on this one. Okay. So can you tell us your position on when legislators who are voting on issues and policy involving charter schools have interests in those charter schools either as leadership on leadership boards or hold leadership positions? So what is your position on legislators actively involved in charter schools?
Well, I'm going to take a step back and go a little bit broader than just charter schools. In Arizona, we have something called the Rule of 10, which means if there are 10 entities like yours, you can vote on it in the legislature, and it is not a conflict of interest according to our Arizona state law, which seems to be awfully low. So I think that that is one thing that needs to change regardless of if it's a charter school or a tuition organization, which is where it's been uniquely problematic. In terms of people voting on legislation that impacts them directly, we need to have a much higher number than what we currently have. So 10 seems a little bit piddly. If there's 10 people in the state that own one thing, a drugstore, then you should not be able to vote on your drugstore if you own one. So in terms of charter school issues, I think that if you are financially benefiting from a charter school, you should not be able to institute laws that allow you to financially benefit from that charter schools. There's some other steps that we need to take in order to regulate charter schools as well. And there was legislation that was introduced last year to do just that. Unfortunately, none of it really got past the committee stage because the dominant party did not choose to hear these things. So one of the things that was submitted was that board members of the charter school should not be related to each other because there tends to be a lot of nepotism in charter school boards. Also, the charter schools should have the same, they should be audited the same as school district schools so that they have the same financial accountability to the state. If we are taking public funds, then we should make sure that those public funds are staying with the public. When charter schools close, the buildings that the charter schools leave behind should go to the school district that they are located in. And right now they don't. And that should be public property because it was paid for with public funds. So charter schools started out as a laboratory, right, where we could have innovation and all these great things. And they become so much more than that, not in a good way. So people have taken what initially was a law for, trying out different educational models and have really abused it throughout the state of Arizona.
Thank you. Julie?
Yes, I'd like to echo that. So we've knocked 17,000 doors since the primary. And in knocking those doors, we discovered a lot about how the residents of LD15 make their choices about where their children go to school. And having the option to attend a charter school in this district is a valued choice. But what is universal in our parenting situation is that nobody wants their charter school to suddenly close overnight. Nobody wants their charter school to be underpaying teachers. Nobody wants their charter school to be unaccountable in the handling of public funds. Last session, there were 13 different pieces of legislation introduced to help bring some accountability to this situation. HB 2357, which prohibited family members of people who sat on charter schools to sit on their boards. HB 2365, which made charter schools part of the open meeting laws that are essential to public accountability and public accounting of funds. And HB 2364, which would make charter schools part of the state procurement system with open bidding so we'd have an idea of where these charter schools are spending their money. Not a single piece of legislation involving charter school accountability reached committee and was heard. That tells me that our current representatives here in LD15, even though they don't own charter schools, are enabling this system. And that's what needs to change. I think all of us were shocked when we heard of the Primavera CEO making $8 million from his schools while delivering some of the worst outcomes to our students. And even more shocked when Eddie Farnsworth made $30 million, we think, off of his charter school sale. It's not accountable, it's not fiscally responsible, and it is one major change that I think all three of us would make if we were elected and earn your vote.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Thank you. Like Kristen, I'd like to take a step back on this question. I would like to talk about a time when I was a student here in Arizona and charter schools were not really a thing. We attended our local school. We attended the school that we could walk just a couple streets down. All of our educational needs were met at that very own local homeschool at the time. So I ask, what if we live in an Arizona where all of our students' needs are already met at the local public school? What if instead of having lots of charter schools, what if we fully fund our schools so that families would want to go to public schools because they are the best? They have the smaller class sizes that many families are leaving to go find smaller class sizes in the charter school. So what if our families felt more connected to our communities because their children's classmates lived just a couple doors down? What if our air was cleaner because we could walk to school rather than drive 10 or 15 miles? So yes, charter schools are an area where we lack accountability. Public meetings are not held for charter schools like they are for public schools, and their budgets are not posted online for charter schools, even though we use taxpayer dollars to fund those schools. So I believe in leveling the playing field requiring charter schools to play by the same rules that public schools do if they are to earn their funding from the same source. I also believe in making sure charter schools abide by the same enrollment procedures that public schools do too. If elected, I would like to enact legislation that makes it impossible for charter schools to turn away students based on their special needs. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kristen, 30 seconds.
So I want to reiterate that this rule of 10, if we expanded it and made it a much larger number, then Eddie Farnsworth would not have been able to vote on legislation surrounding charter schools, because if we made it a number that was a practical number, he wouldn't be in a position to be voting on charter school reform that ultimately garnered him a very big paycheck at the public's expense. It would also prevent people like Steve Yarborough from profiting from tuition organizations, where he is taking corporate money, right, cashing a check, and then writing a check to a private school.
Thank you. So Julie, we will start with you on this one. Audience member, before we start the question though, I do want to remind audience members you can direct questions. We're going to be pretty soon entering into that second half where you can direct questions to candidates, as well as please check those phones to make sure they're on silent. All right, Julie. So audience member has said, it feels like our country and state is divided along political lines like never before. What would you do to heal the divide and work across party lines?
Yeah, the partisanship and tribalism has to stop. It has to. If we're going to survive as a country, if we're going to survive as a state, we cannot continue down this route where whether you're right or wrong depends on the letter after your politician's last name. It's not workable. In my field, so I'm an attorney, we have an adage that lawyers solve problems. And I think that's extra true of legislators. I think our legislators ought to solve more problems than they cause. And I think they need to be solutions oriented. And most importantly, this is a representative democracy, right? Our legislators, in theory, represent us, not their donors, not the super PACs or the PACs that give them money, us, their constituents. And in theory, they should answer our phone calls and our emails, and they should show up for debate so that we can ask them questions. And as a candidate, I'm disappointed because I want to ask our representation, why is it that you voted on the dirty money bill? Why is it that you invited this flood of dirty money back into our elections? Why is it that you voted in an amendment such that charter schools don't have to play by the same rules that our public schools have to play by? Why? Why is it that you wanted to gut our citizen initiative and referenda process? Why? And as a candidate, I don't get to ask those questions, but as a constituent, I do, and they're not here tonight for their job interview to answer those questions for me. So I am extra disappointed by that, and it's not a partisan statement. It is a practical one, that until we're able to listen to each other and really listen to our constituents, we're not going to be able to get past the deep divides that are in our country and our state right now.
All right, thank you. Jennifer.
Thank you. As an educator, we teach our students how to take turns and how to share and how to collaborate and how to get along all the time. I've been doing that for the last 10 years. It is second nature. I hope to be elected and I hope to be down at the Capitol, and I know I can promise that I will work in a bipartisan manner. It's just in my nature. I love that Julie talked about our elected officials being held accountable for communicating with their constituents. I know that the three of us, if elected, would hold open town halls where we could meet our constituents. We've been out knocking on doors. We've been creating relationships with our future constituents. We like to find out what our neighbors are thinking, what values they have, and what's important to them. It's unconscionable that our opponents are not here tonight. It shows where their values lie, and we definitely need a more bipartisan approach if we want to tackle the hard issues that our state is facing right now. Look, we're in an educational crisis. We have a whole lot of issues that we need to tackle as well, including water and immigration and healthcare and a whole host of other things. I hope to be elected, and I hope to work across the aisle to get things done.
All right, Kristen.
Okay, so I want to echo what both Jennifer and Julie said. It would have been nice to have our opponents here tonight to kind of answer for some of the things and the partisanship that has been happening recently. In particular, my opponent, Heather Carter, didn't even RSVP to give us the courtesy to tell us if she would be here or not. And frankly, I'm frustrated because I felt for a long time that she did reach across the aisle, and in the last legislative session, I don't think that that happened. I come from a background as a university educator. I've taught at ASU for almost 20 years. And one thing that I do on a regular basis is I have office hours. I have an open door policy. My students come in, they ask me questions, we dialogue about what we're learning about. And I think that's really important to do with constituents. In terms of trying to come together and create a more bipartisan environment, I also am a statistician. I'm interested in research methods, and I know it's super geeky, but I really love numbers. And I think that when we start looking at problems and we start looking at all of the different solutions offered by everybody, and we come from it as a place of common ground, right? If we want to solve the same problems, maybe we can come up with a solution that works for everybody. So in my life and my research and what I do with my students is try to look at all sides of an issue. And that's been something that I've done my entire life. I really enjoy looking at all sides of an issue before coming to a conclusion. And I think that if we could do that as a legislature, where we didn't just automatically say we can't do that because it was proposed by a Republican, or we can't do that because it was proposed by a Democrat, but instead said, well, how can that get us further along in Arizona? What can we do to further ourselves by coming together? And I think in the last legislative session, or the last, and with Governor Ducey and the water boards, we couldn't even come together to figure out how to address our water crisis, our impending water crisis in Arizona. So I think it's important to work together to do so.
Thank you. And Julie, 30 seconds.
I can't do any better than that. That's exactly right.
Okay, less than 30 seconds. Next question, Jennifer, we will start with you. We live in a border state. What are your thoughts on our current border policy?
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, immigration is a federal issue. However, there's a sound, moral, and humane way that we can treat immigration. The news we saw last summer, where families were separated from one another, is shameful. It's embarrassing that we live in a state that behaves that way. It's embarrassing that we live in a country that behaves that way. My stance on immigration is we can safely, securely handle our borders while remaining humane at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you. Kristen.
So I want to echo what Jennifer said. No family should be separated. There is no reason that we should be tearing children from the arms of their parents at the border when people have come here legally seeking asylum. That is a federal issue. From a state level, there are things that we can do when we talk about how our local law enforcement works with the federal government. What happens right now in the state of Arizona is that our local law enforcement fully cooperates with ICE. Some people think that's great. I am really concerned about the safety and security of my family, and I think it's counterproductive when our law enforcement is working with ICE, because it means that people who are undocumented are afraid to report crimes in their own community. They are afraid to report things like domestic violence and child abuse, and more than that, they're afraid to report on people who might potentially have been the West Side shooter. There was not a lot of cooperation with Phoenix police because undocumented people do not want to talk to police officers. I'm going to give you an example from Los Angeles. There was a police officer who was shot in Los Angeles County. The city of Los Angeles has said, our law enforcement cannot do their job if they're cooperating with ICE. So law enforcement solved that crime thanks to people who were undocumented because they felt like they could come forward and fully cooperate with the police. We are tying one hand behind our police officers' back when we force our police to cooperate with the federal government in something that should not be their job. We need to make sure that our police are fully capable of doing their job and talking to anybody who is willing to talk to them without the fear of deportation. So my stance is that as a state, that is one thing that we can do. We can work towards allowing people to feel comfortable coming forward, reporting on an abusive spouse, reporting on their neighbors who might be abusing a child, and that ultimately will increase the safety and security in Arizona. And we can allow immigration to be dealt with by the federal government.
Thank you. Julie?
Yes, the Supreme Court back in 2010 really did put some handcuffs on what states could do to enforce immigration policy. In a case called U.S. v. Arizona, which dealt with SB 1070, our Supreme Court came back and said just that immigration is a federal issue. We can't have a state immigration policy, we have to have a federal one. We can't add state law crimes, they have to be federal ones. To that end, what the state can do for immigration is somewhat limited. That being said, we can have a system in Arizona that is both fair and humane. We don't have to be cruel and lock children in cages in order to be strong. And I support what Representative Butler and others have done in order to look at the facilities that are currently licensed and holding these small children and separating them from their families. The other thing I think we can do on a state level to help improve immigration overall is to make it a little less of a Hobson's choice. So everyone is frustrated with our immigration system, and we are frustrated because it is slow. It is slow for those who are seeking asylum. It is slow for those who are seeking green cards. It is slow on every single level. And part of that is the fact that we don't have enough representation for people who are seeking asylum or for people who want to come here under any circumstances, really. People in immigration court are the second most likely, second only to family law situations, to not have counsel. In fact, right now we are asking children as young as 3 months to defend themselves in immigration court. This is one of those situations where attorneys can be the answer and the solution rather than the problem. And Arizona should do everything it can to assure access to justice for all.
And Jennifer, 30 seconds.
The first school I worked at here in Arizona was a Title I school. It was in an area of high poverty, and it had a highly transient population. As a teacher, I can't tell you what it felt like to look at my students' faces when they were worried about being deported. That was a third grade classroom with 8-year-old kids who knew what was going on. It's shameful that we live in a nation and a state that treats our immigrants this way, especially considering we are a nation built on immigration.
Thank you. This will be the final question before we switch formats. Again, audience, you can direct questions, so please fill out your cards with directed questions. So final question for all of you. Kristen, we'll start with you. What is your message to independent and moderate Republicans?
So thank you for that question. This is a question that we've been answering at the door for a couple of weeks now. Actually, the three of us have knocked on quite a few doors, as have many of you in the audience, where we have been sharing our message, not with Democrats, but with moderate Republicans and independents. And our message is really simple. And I say our because I think we're pretty united in terms of the things that we bring to the table and what we are asking, why we are asking people to vote for us. So one of the things that we've all kind of seen is we'd like to fully fund education. And Republicans and independents are on board with this. One of the doors that I knocked on was a Republican woman who had voted in the primary. So when I got to her door, I assumed that it might not be the most pleasant of conversations. But after I knocked on her door and she answered, she was very nice. And she said, you know, I was a kindergarten teacher and I'm retired now, and it is unconscionable what is going on in our classrooms. And I cannot believe the number of students that kindergarten teachers are expected to have now. And somebody, somewhere, needs to fix this. And so, you know what? I'm going to vote for you, and I'm going to vote for Jennifer, and I'm going to vote for Julie, because I think that we can fix this. And then she said, I'm going to tell my husband to vote for you, and I'm going to tell my friends. So that message of fully funding education really resonates with Republicans. When we start talking about corruption, that message also resonates with independents and Republicans. I think we are tired of seeing our state coffers used as piggy banks for politicians. And we are tired of politicians playing this game with our lives and our children's lives. And that's what's going on. It's people who are career politicians who have been in office for an extended period of time who are playing games with our public funds. And it's time to put a stop to it. And Republicans and independents agree.
Thank you. Julie?
Yes, thank you. Corruption knows no party. It's not a Republican thing. It's not a Democratic thing. It's not even an independent thing. It's about unchecked power. And we have had unchecked power in Arizona for a very long time. We've had 60 years of a single party control. And when I look at Arizona, I don't see it too differently from Chicago. The names change and the parties change, but the problems remain the same because corruption isn't about party. Corruption is about power. So if you are an independent or a Republican and you are seeking change, my very first question to you is, are you satisfied with your current representation? I have not had a door of the 17,000 I have knocked who has told me yes. Then when we talk ideas, because that's what we do, we talk ideas. Eleanor Roosevelt said it best that great minds discuss ideas, that average minds discuss events, and that small minds discuss people. So when we discuss ideas at the door, we discuss ideas that everybody shares. We discuss fully funding education. We discuss what it looks like to have safe schools. We discuss what ethical and responsible fiscal management looks like. And then at the end, my most favorite question is, well, you sound an awful lot like a Republican. Because when you start talking about corruption, when you start talking about fiscal responsibility, people assume certain things about what party you come from. And the truth is that we agree on so much. There is so much common ground here, and we don't have to have the same letter after our name for us to both be right.
All right, thank you. And Jennifer?
Thank you. As Julie said, pretty soon we're approaching 20,000 doors that we've been knocking. And in the last recent weeks, we have exclusively knocked on independent and Republican doors. And I can't tell you, as a teacher, as a mom, how refreshing it is to have those conversations where I say, hi, I'm Jennifer Samuels, I'm a teacher, and I'm running to fully fund our schools. And they're so excited to engage in that discussion with you. And I love to remind the voters that I was very grateful to be part of that march in the Red for Ed movement on our way down to the Capitol. There were about 75,000 teachers and educators and public school supporters who marched on the Capitol to demand fully funding our schools. And guess what? They weren't all Democrats, right? It was people from all different parties who were there. Everybody, no matter what party you are affiliated with, cares about fully funding our schools and taking care of both our students and our teachers. We are so excited, the three of us, to be elected and to go down to the Capitol and stop playing this bipartisan politics game. We are so excited to fully fund our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kristen, 30 seconds.
So I kind of want to reiterate what Julie said, that a lot of these doors, when we're having these conversations, I'm not coming up and saying I'm a Democrat. I'm coming up and saying I'm Kristen Dipvig-Walko and I'm running for state senate. And I would like your vote. And these are the things that I stand for. And oftentimes we get through an entire conversation and people are like, great, wait, are you a Republican or a Democrat? And at that point, it doesn't matter anymore because they've already decided that the ideas that we've talked about are something that we can share and that they're common ground that we have. I remember when I was growing up that there was a back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. My mother is a Democrat. My father's a Republican. And they used to have lively discussions and debates, and they could come to agreement about things. And I feel like we need to get back to a point where we are talking about our shared values and how we can get there with our policies. Thank you.
All right. So at this point in time, we're going to transition to the second part of our debate where each candidate will receive a separate question with 1 minute to respond. And additionally, I will cue for 30-second responses. They're completely optional. You don't have to do them. Remember, you still may submit audience questions via the note cards and direct them to candidates, please. And the first question is for Jennifer. So Jennifer, how would you protect a woman's right to choose to end a pregnancy from a legislative perspective.
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, I'm very proud to say that I've been endorsed by Planned Parenthood. It's an organization that I hold in great esteem. And I said earlier, I'm a mom. I have only daughters. I have 3 daughters. So I firmly believe in a woman's right to choose. I also believe that should they be caught in the very unfortunate situation where they need to end a pregnancy, that decision should be between my daughter, her partner, and her doctor. The government has no place in that conversation, not one little bit, not ever. So as I said, I'm very proud to be endorsed by Planned Parenthood. I stand by all of their values, and I hope to be elected and advocate for everything they hold near and dear.
Thank you. Julie or Kristen, would you like to comment on that? Kristen, 30 seconds.
So we have laws in the books in Arizona that as soon as if Roe v. Wade is overturned, will immediately not only make abortion illegal, but it also could potentially make birth control illegal. These are laws that were written before women had the right to vote. So they're very antiquated. We need a legislative solution in order to codify and protect our rights to make our own medical decisions. And that's what this is. This is a medical decision. It should be between a woman and her doctor. And it is something that only a woman and her doctor should know about, and they are the only ones who should have an opinion on.
All right, thank you.
Can I too?
Yes, Julie, go.
It transcends abortion. The issues with reproductive justice in Arizona are not just based on the decision to end a pregnancy. What is also at risk if Roe is overturned is our basic rights to medical autonomy. That is how you are treated during birth and your ability to access evidence-based pregnancy care. And it's also how you are treated at the end of your life and your decisions to be able to make those medical decisions that are best for you and best for your family. It's a privacy issue, and if we get a negative Supreme Court ruling, this will become a state issue very quickly.
Thank you. Julie, your question. What is your policy on gun reform?
Yeah, so let's talk about guns. So when we talk about guns, there are 30,000 gun deaths a year. I'd like to talk to you about what we can do to help curb some, if not all of them. First, of those gun deaths that happen, 2/3 of them are self-inflicted. They are either suicide or suicide attempts, which really tells us that that Arizona and the nation has a mental health problem, and we need to be able to increase access to our mental health professionals for those who need it. Secondly, when we talk about the remaining 10,000 deaths, we are by and large talking about unauthorized purchasers and unauthorized users, which tells us that we need to do more about safe storage in Arizona. And I believe safe storage for responsible gun ownership is one of the many potential answers that we can give to the gun violence crisis that's happening in the United States. We also need to look more at those we know are dangerous, and severe threat orders of protection are a way to do that. Those are orders that one can receive when we know of a viable threat so that we can address it before violence occurs.
Thank you. Optional 30 seconds. Either one of you?
I would love to take this one.
Okay. 30 seconds.
Both my immediate family and my extended family have suffered at the hands of gun violence. I feel very passionately about guns. It is time for a difficult conversation about how we can uphold the Second Amendment as well as keep our schools and our communities safe. I tell you, I am so tired of our politicians offering thoughts and prayers and no real solutions. I'm very proud to be endorsed by Moms Demand Action because I believe we need to have that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Kristen.
So I work at ASU. Since Virginia Tech, I entered my classroom the first day of every semester, and I look for where can I hide my students and how can we barricade the doors. And I teach adults. They're grown-ups. I can't imagine having those thoughts running through my head if I was teaching 5-year-olds. It is far past time that we deal with this crisis in our country. One of the ways that we can do this, in addition to the ways that have already been talked about, is to make sure that the background check, when we go to do a background check, that database is complete. In Arizona right now, it is not, which means that people can go buy guns who are not legally allowed to buy them because our background check database does not have them in it.
Thank you. So, Kristen, this will only be for you. What would you propose to address our water crisis?
Okay, so We are on the verge of a very large water crisis. I met a Republican voter at an event who had just moved into LD15 from LD1. She lived about 5 miles from my house, and she had moved down south because she had run out of groundwater in her well. So we are at crisis proportions in some parts of Arizona. The 1980 Ground Management Act can be revisited so that we can look at different ways to manage our groundwater, because we are already at the point where we need to be talking about these things. Lake Mead is about 2 years away from being a non-sustainable source of water for Arizona, and we can start looking at things like not having farmers from Saudi Arabia who've come to Arizona to grow alfalfa. They've come to Arizona because we have groundwater. Guess what they no longer have in Saudi Arabia? Groundwater. They are essentially exporting our water to Saudi Arabia in the form of hay. So we need to have regulations on what can be grown, because that is a high water usage crop that is now being exported to another country. We can look into hydroponically growing feed for cattle in Arizona and lots of other things, but we have to work together to do it.
Thank you. Jennifer, your next question. What legislation, if any, would you propose relating to our utilities?
Yes. I will be voting yes on Prop 127. I believe in clean energy. I believe in solar power, and I believe in protecting our environment by adding legislation that makes it easier for companies that have solar power and wind power to provide efficient utilities to all Arizonans. It's frustrating to think we have such untapped resources here in Arizona, and that large corporations are getting in our way of making us be the leader and the innovator here in solar and wind energy. Thank you.
All right. Julie, this one's for you. Audience member has asked, on a federal level, both parties give new congressmen and House of Representatives a donation requirement. Does this happen locally, and how can we be sure it won't shift your priorities?
A donation requirement.
A donation requirement is how the audience member has worded it.
Well, okay, so I can speak as a clean elections candidate that we have no donation requirement. I, like fellow audience member, am extremely concerned about how money influences policymaking. And as such, that's why I intentionally ran clean. So clean elections candidates, as you probably know, have to have a showing of grassroots support. That means that during the heat of summer, we collected $255 bills from registered voters in our area in order to maintain clean elections funding. Then we collect no money from any PACs, any special interests, the NRA, Russia. It's just clean election, public, non-taxpayer funds that fund us. And I intend to maintain my status as a clean elections candidate, not only in this cycle, but for re-election as well.
So next question. Kristen, we're going to start with you, but we will have the optional 30 seconds for the other candidates. Besides tax incentives, what else can the state do to attract more jobs and new industries?
So I think that that's an excellent question. I know that part of my other duties at work is I run the internship program for our school. And so I know that my students tend to leave Arizona. And I don't know that it's necessarily that we don't have the jobs here. I've talked to a lot of employers who want to hire college-educated people. Those people are leaving the state because they want to have quality education for their children. The people who remain may not be educated enough to take the jobs that we have. I think that the state of Arizona should provide community college for 2 years, free, and vocational school to all adults in the state of Arizona. Very Red, Tennessee has done this. There is a federal program that would allow Arizona to pay 25% of the costs, which works out to about $4 per household per year. With free community college or vocational schools for all Arizona adults, we could certainly grow our economy and provide those people to take those jobs.
Thank you. Optional 30 seconds either. Julie?
Yes, please. So we are moving into the technology economy, the gig economy, the sharing economy. It's an economy where people have total flexibility in some cases as to where they live. And I can tell you, I have seen firsthand that when these families have flexibility as to whether or not they can live in Arizona or live someplace else, they leave. They leave because they want their kids to have a quality public education. They leave because we have one of the worst air qualities in the nation. They leave because we haven't done enough to keep our schools safe. So the best thing that we can do to keep those jobs here is to make Arizona the best place to live.
Thank you. Jennifer, do you want 30 seconds on this one?
Please, thank you. I am fortunate enough to serve on a board of directors for a local credit union. So I know firsthand the importance and the correlation between fully funding our schools and educating our workforce. I know large corporations, when they're looking at Arizona for a place to relocate to, I know that education is a piece of that puzzle there. And I know that they're disappointed when they look at Arizona's K-12 system. So I propose we fully fund our schools.
Thank you. So this will be the last round of questions. Jennifer, your question is, where do you stand on armed teachers?
Well, goodness, let me think. I'm a teacher. I do not believe guns belong in the hands of teachers for a variety of reasons. But let's just talk about the most basic. We have overcrowded classrooms. So I'm a 7th and 8th grade English teacher, and I have about 30 students in all of my classes. Let's say we were in the unfortunate situation where we had an active shooter on campus. How would I navigate across my classroom and safely grab the gun that of course is locked up in a safe location, right? And then I could protect my students with a gun. What if we have teachers that aren't comfortable with guns? Why on earth are we bringing guns into the classroom? Instead, why don't we take all of those resources and talk about how we can make the student-to-school counselor ratio more appropriate? So the American School Counselor Association recommends 250 students for every one counselor. Here in Arizona, we nearly triple that statistic. So no, we don't need guns in the classroom. We need more counselors.
Thank you. Julie, your question. What is your position on requiring some welfare recipients to be drug tested?
That's a terrible idea for a variety of reasons. First, other states have tried this. Other states have tried this, and they found that by and large that those who are on welfare are not spending their limited disposable income on illicit substances. The other thing that they found is that it cost the state far more money to patrol the program, to provide the drug testing, than it reaped in returned benefits. Last, the only benefit that these states tended to find was that those who are in the business of drug testing got rich. And surprise, surprise, most of the people who owned those companies were relatives of our legislators. I don't see the point. I don't see that this is good policy. And if it doesn't make fiscal sense, we shouldn't do it.
Okay, thank you. Kristen, this will be your last question, and we'll open it up to an optional 30 seconds. How will you protect the citizens' right to access medical marijuana in all forms, including edibles?
So the Supreme Court had a decision last year that potentially impacted medical marijuana in Arizona. When we had our ballot initiative for medical marijuana, apparently the Supreme Court has interpreted it only to mean leaf marijuana, so that you could only get that type of marijuana. It's problematic because so many people in Arizona rely on edibles, which have a much more controlled dosage than actually using the leaf product. There are a wide variety of people who use medical marijuana. I think we need to legislate and protect all forms of medical marijuana, so that our veterans who are being treated for PTSD can have access to medical marijuana. We need to make sure that we have it for cancer patients. I had a good friend who had ovarian cancer, and medical marijuana was the only way she could eat, because she didn't want to eat anything, and the only way that she could cure the nausea and make sure she was eating was through medical marijuana. So instead of making it more difficult by only relying on the leaf, we should ensure that edibles and other dosages of marijuana are still available.
Thank you. Optional 30 seconds?
Yes. In that case, which was actually a Court of Appeals case that we're hoping that will go to the Supreme Court, Rodney Jones was found with a concentrate of marijuana, and if it's not overturned, he will go to jail for 2.5 years, even though he has his medical marijuana card, and even though our Arizona Department of Health has said that concentrates are perfectly legal in Arizona. So we literally have a criminal justice nightmare tied up in the red tape surrounding medical marijuana.
Thank you. Jennifer, do you want to comment on this one?
I have nothing further to add other than these are sound, articulate arguments, and I agree.
Great. So we are going to start our closing statements, and we will start with you, Jennifer, 1 minute.
Thank you. I would like to remind the voters how important this election is. We will never properly fund our schools with our current elected leaders. We have a real opportunity here to upend the status quo. These same leaders have been in power for a decade or more. Our current education crisis is a result of their policymaking. As I've said before, education is the foundation of our democracy and it deserves our protection. I also want to remind our voters to not forget to use all your votes. You can vote twice for the State House, and candidate Gunnigal and I hope to have earned both those votes tonight. For a complete list of my endorsements and to learn more about me and my platform, don't forget to visit my website at samuelsforarizona.com, and I'd like to give a little shout out to my family for being here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie, 1 minute.
Yes, thank you. Today would have been Sam Adams' birthday, and he said, if ever a time should come when vain and aspiring men shall possess the highest seats in government, our country will stand in need of experienced patriots to prevent its ruin. I bet that Sam Adams didn't intend those experienced patriots to be 3 strong women running an LD15. Between the 3 of us, we have 9 school-aged children. We have 5 advanced degrees, and we have a 100% commitment to fully funding our public education. I got into this race because I agree with Ms. Samuels. We are never going to have the kind of education and healthcare that we deserve until we address the conflicts of interest, corruption, and dirty money in our government. To join me or to learn more about me, please visit my website at gunnigalforhouse.com. That's Gunnigle forhouse.com. I'm Julie Gunnigal, and I thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you. And Kristen, your closing statement.
Thank you so much for being here this evening. Again, my name is Kristen Dybvig-Puolko, and I'm running for State Senate in LD15. I did not get into this race until May. And the reason that I got into this race is that I went on the website to see who I could volunteer for who was running against Heather Carter in LD15. And lo and behold, there was nobody there. So I decided that I would put my name in and I would run for State Senate. Since that time, I have looked over and seen what has really happened with our LD15 representatives over the past 10 years that they have been in office. It is time to get new representation for LD15. If we do not get new representation in some shape or form, we will not fully fund education. University education will continue to suffer, and it will be unaffordable for most Arizonans to send our children to our universities. If you'd like to join me, you can check out my website at www.electkdp.com, because I would never ask you to try and spell my last name. And again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. To our candidates, we thank you so much for participating in the forum here this evening. And to our audience members, we thank all of you who took the time to come and inform yourselves before voting. We encourage you to visit www.azcleanelections.gov/voter dashboard for a customized experience to find information on the primary election, or actually the general election now, the candidates and the issues, and to view this debate on demand. Please fill out the debate evaluation and return the form to one of our volunteers. Your feedback is important to the commission and will help improve our future debates. Thank you for coming tonight. You're welcome to stay and speak directly with our candidates. Good night.